Have you been complaining about the growing inflation? Have your monthly expenses gone up? Are you now paying more for your daily essentials, things like rice, cooking oil, pulses and more? If you are, you're not alone. It's happening across the world. In India, for instance, inflation has jumped. In Sri Lanka, there is a food shortage. In Nepal, inflation has touched a 19-month high. In Bangladesh, inflation is breaking records. In the month of November, it touched a 5-year high. And in Pakistan, food inflation is crushing the poor. Like I said, price rise is hurting everyone, everywhere in the world. The whole of South Asia, for instance, is struggling with inflation. It's happening due to a combination of domestic and international factors. But I'm not going to discuss that tonight. I'm here to tell you that this inflation will get worse because of one country, China. China is adding to global inflation. How? By hoarding the world's grain. How much? More than half of the global supply. China is hoarding more than half of the global supply of food grains. This includes maize and grains, other grains. China represents less than 20% of the world's population, but it has a stockpile that can feed more than 50% of the planet. China's mass hoarding is causing a global price rise. It is also pushing countries into famine. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you about the dangerous fallout of China's mass hoarding. First, let's tell you what China is doing. How much food supply is Beijing hoarding? Let's give you some numbers. Estimates say China has 69% of the world's maize reserves, 60% of the rice reserves, and 51% of the wheat reserves. Going by one report, China's food supplies are at a quote-unquote historically high level. And it's just one Chinese state-owned enterprise that is building the stockpile. It's called the COFCO Group, COFCO. This is a major food processing company. The COFCO Group runs one of China's largest food stockpiling bases. It is in Dalian, in northeast China. It's a port. It has 310 huge silos. They store beans and grains supplied from within China and abroad. From here, the port of Dalian, China distributes food to the rest of the country. You could say the COFCO Group is critical for China's food security. But for the rest of us, it's a threat. Because this mass hoarding of food in China is impacting the world. Let me show you how. Number one, food prices are rising across the world. They have jumped by 30% in a year. These are numbers from November this year. They were compiled by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. Number two, the hoarding is pushing countries into famine. Again, we have some numbers from the United Nations. In 2020, 700 million people were living in famine-like conditions. In recent years, these numbers have gone up by 100 million. So more people are starving now. Experts in Japan are blaming the Chinese for this. Let me tell you what one of them said, and I'm quoting. Although developed nations as a whole are responsible for famine, China's responsibility is heavier. China should contribute to resolving the maldistribution of food. Now, this should not come as a surprise. When one country takes up more than 50% of the world's supply, what do you expect? The question is, why is China hoarding? Why are they doing it? And to understand that, you have to flip the pages of history. The Communist Party of China is paranoid about food security. It's because of this man, Mao Zedong, the founder of modern-day China, also the brain behind one of the biggest man-made disasters in human history. In 1958, Mao Zedong proposed the Great Leap Forward. This was China's second 5-year plan, the Great Leap Forward. Mao Zedong wanted to industrialize the Chinese economy, and he wanted to do it quickly. He ended up ruining it. He reorganized China's population into communes, and they were forced to drop everything else and make steel in their backyards. Regular people, everyone basically. Farm work was stopped. Pots and pans were confiscated. The result was a massive famine, one that is said to have killed as many as 45 million people. Things were so bad that people ate human flesh from dead bodies to survive, according to some accounts. The famine ended after 1962, but the horrid memories still live on. More than 50 years later, Mao's Great Leap still haunts the Communist Party of China. It cannot afford food shortages of any kind. The last 2 years have been challenging, though. Several reports have indicated a shortage of food. Speculation began with a speech from Xi Jinping. Last year, remember, the Chinese president announced what he called Operation Empty Plate. On the face of it, this campaign was meant to end food wastage, to avoid excessive consumption, which should be good. But behind the scenes, the Communist Party was basically conducting a crackdown. Restaurants started limiting the number of orders they took. Chefs were encouraged to serve smaller portions. Mukbang videos were attacked by Chinese state mouthpieces. What is mukbang? Videos of people binge eating large quantities of food. This kind of videos were quite famous in China at one point. Millions tuned in to watch, but the government attacked them. The people of China saw all of this as a sign. They joined the dots. They started panic buying. Chinese citizens rushed to supermarkets. Shelves ran out of food. People feared that there was going to be a food shortage. Beijing cannot afford another panic situation like this, so it is hoarding food supplies and maintaining surplus stock, even if it contributes to global hunger. This food stock is basically like an insurance policy against a bigger crisis. The Chinese economy, we know, is going through some tough times. Unemployment exploded in China last year. As of April 2020, more than 200 million Chinese workers were unable to find jobs. China's biggest vehicle of growth is stuttering, that is exports. Chinese factories are going bankrupt. 460,000 of them have been closed recently. But the bigger worry is failing debts. They could start a major economic crisis in China. This month, Evergrande officially defaulted on its debts. Evergrande, we know, is the world's most indebted property developer. It owes more than $300 billion to its creditors. And the crisis is not limited to Evergrande in China. Other property developers owe $5 trillion. $5 trillion. Besides Evergrande, at least 4 more developers have defaulted. The property sector is very big in China. It represents 30% of the country's economy. If it collapses, it will affect every major sector. Banks will struggle since they won't be able to recover the loans they gave to these property developers. Construction activity could slow down, even come to a halt. And this would have a direct impact on job creation. You see, everything is linked. Long story short, China has its plate full of problems. The last thing the Communist Party wants is a food shortage, which is why it is hoarding food supplies so that it can maintain internal stability. This is an artificially created crisis. The sole purpose of this hoarding is to protect the Communist Party of China, not the people of China. Make no mistake. And the rest of the world is paying the price for Beijing's insurance against its own mistakes. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.